It is now my great pleasure to welcome the teams and speakers that will be speaking in our grand final today. Firstly, I'd like to applaud them and congratulate them for making it this far and invite you to join me. In opening government, we have USU 1, which consists of Imogen, Harper and Emily here. I'm incredibly neglectful and I forget which number your team is. 4. In opening opposition, we have University of Sydney Union 4, consisting of Eden, Blair and Eswaran. In closing government, we have AMU 1, consisting of Amrit, Agastia and Thurlow. And in closing opposition, we have UNSW 1, consisting of Simone Tai and Harper. I'd also like to introduce our adjudicating panel. Today we are joined by Eileesha from University of Chalmers from the University of Melbourne. Cellini Basri from the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Tamara Abdi from Western Sydney University. Chahoud from Macquarie University. Kelsey, Adcock from the University of Queensland. And sharing our fine panel of adjudicators today is Tamara Jenkins from Vic Wellington.
So today's motion has an info slide that reads as follows. Japan has recently lifted a ban on the creation of animal-human hybrids by allowing scientists to conduct stem cell experiments to grow human organs inside animals. China has also been experimenting with the transplant of human brain cells into animal subjects to achieve advanced cognition. The motion is as follows. This House believes that Western liberal democracies should allow the experimentation and creation of animal-human hybrids. Welcome to everyone involved.
Medical research is some of the toughest but most rewarding research in the world. It gives people, who have things like liver cancer, maybe a new liver. It may give people who need new skin an opportunity to get a new skin. It gives people a chance to live where they otherwise would not have. Maybe new advances in science, particularly big leaps like this one, seem at face value scary or uncomfortable or strange or like something out of a Tumblr porn blog. That doesn't mean that we ought, at first instance, ban it, especially if we have the chance to regulate it, especially if we have the chance to see how many lives we could save with that research. It is wrong to rob some people in the world of the right to access the kinds of benefits this research would allow if there was a global democratic cooperation on this kind of research. I am very, very proud to propose to you today. So, 2 things in this speech. Firstly, why we think this is a legitimate and important area of research to pursue, and then I'm going to tell you why, given this research clearly already now exists, we ought to be a part of that research sphere. Firstly, on why this is a particularly legitimate area of research. Note that we think of has quite a high bar to kind of prove that the state ought restricts this kind of research at first instance before it has been explored or kind of the extent to it has been kind of at least tapped into a little bit. So we think that there is quite a high bar there for restricting it. We obviously kind of emphasize see that if we can see some potential for a huge scale of benefit, even if that benefit is not maybe immediately forthcoming, we would allow that research and the state recognises that. What are the kinds of benefits we are talking about then there? Obviously, things like growing, like potentially human organs in animals, or kind of being able to further research, for instance, on things like stem cells, has huge benefits. It could mean, like I flagged in my intro, giving someone who has something like liver cancer an entirely new liver that has been grown out of an animal. It could mean things like giving people new skin where they've been, for instance, severely burnt and therefore have to live in horrible pain constantly. It could be things like developing further stem cell research so that we can then externally grow organs from scratch and things like that. But not only are there immediate kind of medical benefits, we also think that this importantly allows for research more broadly to be particularly already do, that research is infinitely more accurate, that research is infinitely more useful. I cannot understate the relevance of that, because that research seeps into every area of scientific research. Any area of scientific research that currently uses animals for research will be immensely and indescribably improved if all of their results can be much more applicable to humans, and we can guess much better how things like, for instance, medicines or therapeutic kinds of processes would apply if they were actually given to humans, because those animals will now better resemble how that would occur in, well, alright, how that would occur in humans. But finally, we think obviously there are probably likely to be some good benefits to kind of animals themselves having more consciousness in society. You know, things like companionship from them will probably vastly improve, and that is also probably something good. The impact of this is immense. It could mean that millions of people are affected, millions of people have better access to health and medical technologies, but also scientific kind of developments that would benefit entire countries and communities of people. Importantly, we shouldn't rob some citizens in some countries access to kinds of the fruits of that research, particularly given that, as I'm going to tell you in a second, it is unlikely that the countries that are currently conducting that research would share the fruits of that research with us willingly if they felt like we were frowning upon that research or were shaming them for conducting it. Secondly, though, I'm going to tell you why there is nothing morally wrong with creating more consciousness in the world before I do closing.
Do you think it is morally wrong to have sex with animals, or to eat them, or to otherwise interfere with their bodies?
Well, so here's what I'm going to tell you in a second, is we actually think there might be a positive moral right for us to allow animals the chance to have this consciousness. So I guess this responds in the sense that we think there is this actually distinct moral obligation we have with this particular kind of experience with animals, and we think we ought to meet that. Which is to say, we do not firstly think there is anything kind of inherently morally wrong with creating more consciousness in the world. In fact, we would argue that it is potentially immoral to actively prevent, where you know there is that potential, where you know you have that ability, a new class of consciousness, you know, kind of just because. We think that we ought to facilitate that kind of evolution, just like how we would never allow, if we knew we had the chance to prevent it or to do otherwise, someone who is a human to be robbed of their consciousness, someone who is a human to be robbed of their life. We think this is symmetric and analogous in the sense that there is no real inherent difference between saying we would not, if we had the power to, take away someone's consciousness, and saying we would, you know, like that is equal to saying, like if we have the power, we know to give someone a consciousness and we do not use that power, we are actively robbing a potential new class of consciousness from emerging. Since we seem to recognize then, because we would not rob someone of a consciousness, because we recognize that value, that consciousness brings you a better form of happiness, we think it is wrong for us to decide that that potential should be robbed from an entire class of beings. We think those beings deserve that consciousness too, particularly when we already know that we have the ability to give it to them. We are saying withholding that, where that possibility is clearly there, is particularly morally dubious. So we think, firstly, this is a legitimate area of research, and it's in fact something we ought actively pursue on moral grounds. But finally, why do we think that we ought to be a part of this research field, given that some countries are already have opened up this kind of research? Firstly, what I said earlier is that it is kind of unlikely for this kind of research to stop in those countries because they clearly have recognized the usefulness of that research, which is why they've taken active steps like lifting a ban. They obviously recognize that this research has potential and usefulness. We think that those countries are less likely to share the fruits of that research if we are kind of shaming them for doing it, or we are saying it's not in line with our moral code, or we think it is disgraceful or dangerous, or things like that. We think we ought to take part in that research field, and given that it has already opened up, because those countries are not only likelier to cooperate and share knowledge and research with us if we do not decree it as being something bad or something that we ought not explore, but we would also argue that because that research then is likely to be better regulated in Western liberal democracies, and the outcomes of that research are likelier to be reported well to the public in free scientific communities like in Western liberal democracies, and open it up to discourse and discussion and debate, which is what we want. We think it is particularly important, if we have potentially concerns about this kind of research, that we have a global democratic discourse engaging with this research, that there is knowledge being shared, that if concerns arise from research done in Australia, we are able to flag it to countries that are already engaging in that kind of research and warn them of dangers and warn them of things that we think might be immoral aspects of that research. At the end of this speech panel, we think this research is incredibly important and has the power to change millions of lives, but given that it has already emerged, it is particularly important for everyone to have a stake in it and everyone to get a say in it with us.
If it has been proven that a pig has the same sentience, intelligence, and emotional
level of a 3-year-old human child, there is no way that this government team can say it is principally justified to support this motion. I'm going to be proving to you why a lot of the benefits that they wanted to talk about can come about in other ways, and even on our side, if we are trading off this happening at a longer rate, we think it is worth the thousands of lives that this is going to save, because one liver or one skin graft, which most of the time we can do under the status quo, is not enough to justify the moral burden that they have to overcome. I'm firstly going to be looking at why this is principally unjustified, then I'm going to be looking at the purpose of the research, whether it will be successful, and if it was successful, would it even be good? So firstly, why is this principally unjustified? Firstly, it is extremely cruel and unethical to test on animals, particularly because the type of animals that we will be testing on for this particular type of organ donation will be the more sentient animals. These are like cows, pigs, sheep, that have the intelligence, complex emotions, and all these sorts of things that we value in humans. They experience pain the same way as we do. And if you would not do unnecessary surgery on someone that was human, and that because of the pain that they would experience, there is no logical, moral basis to do this on an animal. But secondly, as I mentioned, they are sentient and have complex emotions, often greater than many humans. Thirdly, you bring animals into existence for this purpose, where their entire lives are suffering. This is obviously not principally justified. And secondly, we think the things you are testing on, you can test in other ways. But additionally, under this, we think, as a Western liberal democracy, because you have access to greater resources and greater money, you have a larger moral burden than other countries to do the research in ways that are more ethical. Because you can use synthetic means of doing this, you ought comply with this higher moral burden because you have the capacity to do so. Additionally, we think you have to test these animals in particularly cruel ways, unlike other research. That is to say, you often have to test how they would react in different types of humans. So in a human with cancer, you often have to give the animal cancer in order to see how it would react in that specific instance. Obviously, subjecting these animals to this heinous pain is completely unjustified. You have a right to be free from pain, and if we accept that these animals feel pain in the same way that we do, this is completely unjustified. But additionally, if we wanted to do a trade-off and say the principle could be worthwhile if it has some practical benefit, let's analyse what this practical benefit could be, because I think it's deeply unclear what they've really proven in this case. Because the most likely use of this is probably growing organs inside animals instead of synthetic conditions. Why do we think this is probably true? We think it's obviously presumably cheaper than the synthetic stem cell research, and this is why it can happen. But are these benefits worthwhile? Firstly, we think there is a direct trade-off with other scientific research when you put your money into this kind of thing. And I think we should note here that it's likely to be extremely expensive, an expensive kind of research, because a lot of synthetic research now just uses AI modelling and all of these sorts of things, and arguably can be more important than direct research. Because if you want to talk about helping, cancer patients or people that need organ donations, we have much better solutions for you. Firstly, we think Western liberal democracies should simply, to deal with organ shortages, should simply have opt-out organ donation systems that addresses the entire need for organs in the first place. But secondly, it is because often in a lot of these cases, even if they farm the organ successfully in the animal, once they try and transplant it into a human, it is so notoriously unsuccessful because human bodies reject these types of organs. Additionally, it's because in the past, we have done so much of this research on animals that we've reached a sufficient level of knowledge that we sort of can in the scientific community about what we need to know about animals. We think at this point, we already have the capacity to do skin grafts, which they wanted to talk about. We already have the capacity to solve organ shortage issues with other methods. It is unclear why we would then breach this principled obligation at that point. Additionally, we think that obviously we would rather it take longer than the hundreds of animals that would have to die for this to occur. We think things like stem cell testing already occurs, and they have not proved any unique benefit beyond the status quo. But then, to question, will it actually be successful? I think that this is clearly untrue. Firstly, the West has moved to synthetic modelling because this has been tried and it has been notoriously not successful. Additionally, we have so much research on this in other ways that we do not think they've proven anything. So, then the next question is, would we be able to regulate it in the situation that we did go ahead with it in the West? Because they wanted to say that there's going to be a particularly fine and good form of this kind of research. Firstly, obviously the scientific community is not particularly transparent. If you've heard of Big Pharma, you know that it is notoriously bad and exploitative. Obviously, Big Pharma has a lot of money, they care about monetary gain, and because of this they have a lot of lobbying power to discourage the government from properly regulating these kinds of industries. And additionally, they may say then the public would be outraged if there was such cruelty to animals, but there is little political capital for regulation, as most people firstly eat meat, the
public isn't clearly that, doesn't care about animals that much, but secondly it is because the public sees animals like pigs and sheep and cows differently to the way they see their pet dog. It is unclear why there would be any political capital to regulate this in any way. And lastly, it is because humans are inherently anthropocentric, so they care about humans much more than other beings, so we do not think that this would be regulated in any case. But if it did succeed, would it even be good for these animals? Because they said animals have a deserve to be conscious, but this assumes that consciousness is inherently good, and they have not proved that. Because most animals live on Earth, their life on Earth is extremely bad, and would be deeply upsetting to see that you are a factory farm. You're going to be kept in captivity by these scientists who want to exploit you and test on you to make money. It's because you are used as servants of the human race. You are watching your natural environment degrade. It would just simply be unclear what benefit animals would get from having any sort of form of sentience. I'll take clothing.
So given China is currently doing this, and China will probably have a monopoly on the market, presumably the Western governments are more prone to regulation and therefore to take away the monopoly in some capacity?
I don't think that China and Japan will have a monopoly on this for the reason that I just stated, that I don't think this research will ever even be successful. So you first have to prove that they would actually succeed, then you can say that maybe they would have a monopoly on this. But even if it did succeed, I'm going to give you structural reasons why I think they would actually have an incentive to share this research. First, it is because scientists have an incentive in their own careers to share research, because they obviously want to take credit for it. They care about the scientific community, they care about breakthroughs, and presumably if you're in this line of research, you care about saving people's lives, so obviously you would want to save as many people's lives as possible. But also because of the monetary incentives I just mentioned in terms of big farms, they obviously want the most amount of customers possible. This will probably be opening it up to the West. We think that they obviously want to share this kind of information. But lastly is the issue of whether China or Japan cracking it earlier than us would be bad, and maybe if we cracked it earlier, it would save a lot of lives. Firstly, it is unlikely that we could crack it before China or Japan because they have a time advantage over us inherent in the info slide. Two, it is unclear what cruelty China or Japan would inflict on these animals that would be distinct from anything that we would do. There is no way we can do this in an inherently moral way. We are necessarily transplanting organs into animals without their consent. This is obviously incredibly painful, and we just do not think there is any way in which this is principally justified because there have been no benefits proved so far. Thank you.
Look, if opening opposition wants to run a hardline approach to animal rights where we should never use an animal's body for medical research, all power to them, but let's be honest about the kind of burden they are setting themselves. Because, truthfully, the way in which the flu vaccine is created is by infecting usually horses with a strain of the flu, bleeding it dry, harvesting its blood, harvesting its antibodies, and then injecting it into humans. That cannot be done in an AI stimulation. That is done with horses and by killing them. Opening opposition, by their principle, would say that is wrong. That is also true of, for instance, the fact that, yes, there might be an opt-out system for skin, but not all skin is taken. Skin done with, for instance, a human's DNA where it was properly curated would definitely be taken. So is true of a liver, so is true of a heart, so is true of, for instance, brain cells, where again, they say, well, there are other ways to do it. Maybe, but they're not there yet, and even if this technology is not there yet, it's unclear why their absurdly applied moral principle should rob future medical patients who are in pain or who are in fear of death from the ability to access this because they think maybe AI will get there. That is absurd, and although they said their principle, they ran away from even the semblance of what it would look like if it were applied reasonably. The first question I'm going to ask here is this research legitimate and important? Let's be clear, there is an incredibly high bar for banning medical research, and if it is that all animals have rights, as I explained in my introduction, they have a lot to stand by. It's not just the flu vaccine. Any kind of test for antibiotics, your internal bacteria have to be grown on a blood agar where that blood is generated from an animal. They would not be able to create the literal petri dishes which first years were used to learn about medicine. Like, the list goes on and on. Just like, it's crazy to say that we should never use animals for research. And the kind of principle that they would need to be standing by, I think they need to do a lot more than be like, your dog is cute, so is a pig. So that's their part. Why is it that we think it is legitimate to infringe on animals' rights compared to humans if we're dealing with medical research? The first is the scalability of the harm. Obviously, we're not going to say like utilitarianism is always correct, but we think in the instance of the scale of harm that is being applied to the scale of the animals, the benefits that it's getting to humans is significantly enough better that we would do this. In contrast to, say, vegetarianism, which we are on, but you might say that's a kind of one-to-one trade-off of one person could just eat tofu instead. That is different to dying of a bacterial infection or flu or pneumonia instead. Why is it that we think that we can infringe on animal rights? As I said, the scale of hurting one animal is significantly smaller than the scale of, for instance, being able to have meaningful chemotherapy for cancer patients or being able to understand the way in which an organ transplant could work. But secondly, we do think that there are reasons to think that the form of consciousness or the form of feelings which animals currently have should be deprioritised compared to what it is that humans are experiencing. First of all, we think that an awareness of pain and a fear that that pain will come is something that is important to consider, and there are ways to make it so that animals are not aware that that is going to happen to them. If you keep a rat in a cage where you give it sugar water that it really loves, and then eventually, you put it to sleep and you see if its brain has reacted to the sugar water or whatever, it is deeply unclear to us that that rat has been harmed in any meaningful way. If it was not fearful of that death coming, if it was obviously it's dead, but if it's risk that we should consider equivalent to the rest of the medical research. We think it's not fearful of that pain, we think it's not aware of that pain. And specifically on the question of rights, we think that a big part of the reason why, or possibly even the main reason why rights are important, is an awareness that your rights are being infringed, or an awareness that somebody you love rights are being infringed. It is not clear that, it's not true that animals are aware of their rights being infringed. It is not true that their loved ones are aware of those animals being infringed. Obviously, we support reasonable conditions on how those animals are treated. That happens under our side of the house, when, for instance, there is an awareness of whether or not these animals might be developing consciousness, and that can be put out to the broader community, rather than being hidden in the labs, which are not part of the global research community. If they want to say that Big Pharma is evil, that is exactly why it might go to a country like China, why it might hide its research. That is not going to happen if it's government-funded universities in Western liberal democracies saying, if, for instance, we put stem cells into a rat, that rat suddenly starts showing signs of fear, that kind of research should be stopped. That is the benefit that you have from this happening in a global sphere. So, what does this offer? It is absurd to say that AI simulations are going to be able to cure cancer. The ignorance that this opening opposition has about our own ignorance of the human body is absurd. We do not understand the way in which the human brain works. We do not understand the way in which the body works. Note, for instance, that we would have an opt-out system. That does not deal with all organs. If you have an opt-out system, then we wouldn't hurt animals that much. We'd only hurt them in cases where we needed to. But it's also things like, for instance, the creation of bloods that would deal with all other bloods and not only be O negative or whatever. The fact that that could, say, constantly be carried in ambulances in the instance there was a car crash. It's benefit like those, and it's a lot of speculative benefits, and that's why we have to allow this research, because it could have such a big impact. That's the opening.
Animal testing on animals that have been upgraded to be more like humans is worse than any animal testing in the past, because they are more human-like, they're likely to be more aware, and they're likely to have more sensitivity to pain in a way that is more like you. Even if you don't care about animals, shouldn't you at least half care about a half-human animal?
Well, yes, but it's unclear why other people wouldn't half care about a half-human animal. Consciousness is easily understood. We would still apply the kind of things I discussed, such as an awareness of the fact your rights are being infringed, being able to show pain. All of that is contingent on showing that this research wouldn't be developed, or would be developed and bizarrely shown to the rest of the world that you know will be judgmental about it. If you are concerned about that, it is worse under your side of the house, and they are treated significantly more cruelly. We think making sure that people are aware of this research from the get-go means that theoretical strong lines can be drawn. If animals start to show an increased amount of fear, we must stop immediately. That is the kind of thing that you can only get at opening government. We also think, though, that you shouldn't rob these animals of a chance to be more conscious. They say animals live factory farms and, their environment is degraded. Humans live in a capitalist system and their environment is degraded. I am glad I am conscious, and I am sure you are too. It is not up to opening opposition to decide that a dog is really happier living in muck. We think that animals have the right to be able to express themselves in a more meaningful way. If that is something that they could potentially get, they'll get more rights in the process and actually stop the harm that this opposition branch degrades. The alternative is terrible for the people who don't get access to the medical research, and it's terrible for the animals. That is why we absolutely propose.
The reason that the most egregious forms of animal testing has because we have sympathy for them or because we've grown more ethical ourselves. It's because we know it's just not as effective as the new methods that we have in the modern day. And opening government seeks to change that. They seek to make animals more like humans so that the tests that we are currently doing in synthetic ways can be brought back to animals. And maybe it will be cheaper, maybe it will be faster, but these animals have the ability, like almost the thing I want to say is these animals are people. The animals have the ability to feel pain, they have consciousness, they have everything that you could possibly care about. And even if they didn't currently, they will once they're upgraded to respond the way human bodies do, to respond the way human nerves do, to respond even the way that human brains do. A pig, I already believe, is equivalent to a human being, but if you don't, it would be after government. And that's why we cannot allow this to happen, because they will continue to be dehumanized, but they will be tortured in a way that is deeply unethical. And that is the goal set up by opening government. First, how unethical is this? First, let's dispense this idea that we owe animals consciousness. First, animals are already conscious, because think about it, but they are conscious. And there is no such thing as a class of consciousness. As far as we know, all consciousness is consciousness. And lastly, there's no reason to expect that one class of consciousness is better than another class of consciousness. So there's no reason to say they should be deprived from one or the other. And their argument about the classes of consciousness has even more disturbing implications than any of ours, which would just mean that you would go home and eat some vegetables. Theirs are like, we would not have any regulation on the way that we develop AI, because that could be a new class of consciousness. That would be like forcing every human woman to bring as many babies to term as she possibly could, because that would be a new little bundle of consciousness. And that's why this class of consciousness idea does not make sense. But it is just pretty obvious that this is going to be evil. There is no clear endpoint to this research. It is testing on animals in a way that is deeply unethical. And they were like, all you said was a pig is cute. No, Maya said a pig feels pain like your 3-year-old child. And that's why a pig deserves not to have that pain inflicted. No one deserves to have that pain inflicted on them. They were like, we can make it ethical by giving the pig a lollipop. No, we cannot. We told you the reasons you need to do these experiments are, for example, people who have had burns on their skin, so you need to burn the animal and see what will happen. Anything that the human is suffering, you need to have an animal have that. They're the control, no treatment. Have an animal have that, they get the treatment, it doesn't work. Screw you, animal. Then you just do that in like infinitum, and then most experiments never reach a result. Most hypotheses are thrown out the window. Their prospects of success are incredibly low. So yes, it is immoral. They were like, well, they don't have awareness, which is an incredibly human-centric view of what rights you should have. Just like feeling pain is probably wrong, and you want to test the ways to reduce pain in people. So you'll need to put pain in the animals. So next, they were like, and importantly we said, this is more sentience on the worst lives on earth. For example, we might think it would be good if our factory farm animals were more sentient, because maybe we could more easily instruct them and tell them where to go. Maybe we could toilet train them in a way that's more easier, and then factory farmers would get a lot out of that, right? They already put heaps of hormones in them, but that they are living like these lives of torture on earth, and that is nowhere comparable to capitalism. And like honestly, you just gotta, it's like honestly so awful. The people are gonna look back on this speech in years and be like, whoa, she was right. So, experiments on human-like animals are even more immoral than any flu vaccine of the past. Regulations are unlikely to catch up with the sentience of the animals. For example, they haven't caught up with the current sentience of the animals. We haven't banned factory farming. We haven't banned eating meat. And that's why it's important. And like, even this opening government team believes animals aren't conscious. So why would these regulations catch up that when there's so many economic incentives for them to not to? And the fact that we need to upgrade them to be more human-like almost proves our point that this is unlikely to be successful, because it just shows how unlikely it is that an animal's organ would ever become my heart or my liver. It's because we basically know these things do not work. And that's a really convincing way to end this point, because if it is unethical, they really do need to prove that it's as good as the flu vaccine or more. They really do need to have to prove that this is world-changing. And I agree that some science has been world-changing. Maybe so world-changing that if I really did the maths, I would err on the side of hurting the animals, although I doubt it. But they have not proved that, and I'm going to be going on to that after I take closing.
So, animal
hasn't worked in the past. Animals are already extraordinarily like humans in every way. But all of you have probably heard that like calves cry when they're taken away from their mothers, but you still drink milk. It just doesn't work. We need to have less animals. So next, given that this is unethical, it needs to be incredibly beneficial for it to be worthwhile, which they have not proved. Firstly, there is very little prospect for success. Animal to human organ transplants are very unlikely to happen. Most experiments ever fail and do not come to a result. Like that is most people's, if you're doing your science degree and you become a researcher, you know that you'll be just disproving hypotheses again and again. That was a key premise of the case, no proof of it. Secondly, this is mostly used for organs for which we have a variety of other solutions. For example, synthetically growing organs. For example, opt-out organ donation. For example, any other way to get organs, which even if it was more expensive or took longer, we would prefer to have. And we do not think that they've given you any reason to think that this would be better than those. And I think that that is enough. Like, even if they say that this would help any human life be also a little bit longer, like you would get cancer and die at a certain age, which is very horrible, but we do have a lot of pain medication for you. And that extra 5 years also has to be worth it on your life. There's no prospect for success. But then here's the thing, there's also no prospect for people accessing this. What we know is that Big Pharma has all sorts of fancy drugs. They are incredibly expensive. They are not given to most people with liver cancer. They are not given to most people with malaria. And so then, even if they were to prove that these experiments will work, which they have not done, they have not proven that it will have even the flu vaccine. Think of how many people are not flu vaccinated. So that's why you have to ask yourself, given the incredibly speculative benefits of this, are you willing to torture animals? You should be saying no to yourself. But if you were saying yes by accident, you should be saying, I would not torture a human-like animal because you're some human-centric person, whatever, that's on you. But either way, OO wins.
Closing government's debate is going to be the first thing to say that in our attempt to fight things like climate change, to bring humanity away from things like slaughterhouses, to make it easier for us to live a meaningful life, that we must bring animals closer to humanity, in every sense of the word. I appreciate opening government talking about organ stuff and why we can benefit humanity. I'm very happy to agree with the opening option. There are tons of alternatives, but there is no alternative but to give animals increased cognition and the ability to feel and experience emotions the way humans do to human stem cell crap. So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about this technology and what is the distinction between the consciousness that currently exists and what this technology can bring. Because indeed the distinction that closing government will bring is that this research will be the pivoting point in the way in which we frame animal rights issues, things like fighting for veganism, and things like fighting against slaughterhouses, which both impact humanity as well as animal rights. Firstly, what is the class of consciousness that animals have that we don't currently think is valuable, therefore we kind of preclude them from things like human rights? They have the ability to respond to stimuli, things like pain, things like pain, like happiness, but those things exist in every living organism that exists. The second thing they do is they have their primal bonds with people of their species, i.e. a family bond that every other species also has. What does this technology do and what are we on the cusp of doing? The first thing we are on the cusp of doing is enabling things like complex processing of human emotions, i.e. the awareness of the self and the way the self interacts with specific core values. Second is the communication of these values in a way in which is not just, I feel pain. It is, I feel pain in this specific way, I would like this specific redress. This is not to say things like they will be able to speak our languages, but they will be able to move in this direction, as we see with elephants being able to signal how much they are suffering from specific things and moving away. The third is things like individuality, the capacity for them to feel specific ways. Now, why is this technology moving in this direction? We have done things, and the reason I know this, because I fucking read about this motion, is because the way we have transferred our capacity for individuality, self-awareness onto artificial intelligence and computers is the same way we're able to do this onto literal brains that replicate ours, which is what is to suggest that this technology is on the path to doing these things. It is not a marginal change in consciousness, it is a revolutionary change in consciousness and the way animals process emotions. Having established this, what is our extension? The first thing I want to talk about is why we think we're better able to defend human rights. The open opposition is uncompared in this debate. They kind of go, we can't do this because it's brutal. In your world, we are stagnant on animal rights. Slaughterhouses continue to exist. They have some processing powers, but we don't do anything about it. And people's biggest opposition is just, they don't feel the way we feel. They don't process individuality the way we feel. They don't know what it's like to have values and individual perceptions of their identity. These are reasons why people draw the line in the status quo. We would suggest as a result of this research and the move towards this, a couple of things will happen. The first is we have greater work. Things like manufacturing, like stupid fucking things like putting an iPhone together. Things that IAs can do. If you could do that onto animals, we think that obviously benefits humanity. If that the lowest rung don't unstuck in jobs like this. But the second thing to note is, to the degree that there is testing, the alternative on the government bench are things like human testing, in that we pay poorer people, incentivize them to opt into medical trials. That is obviously more inhumane, and to the degree that animals are more and more conscious, we can give them right but also benefit of these individuals. For those two reasons, we think these impacts are more important than all that's supplied in the opening government, because we think there are alternatives for this. There's no alternative for animal right activism as a result of it. Because
if humans will only care about animals and sentience, does that not illegitimize the push towards animal rights for only animals when you only validate their experience because they are sentience?
what? No. In the status quo, no push, we don't care about cockroaches and all the idiots that have no brains. In our, as a result of greater cognition, you play on the human emotion that we are closer to each other than we are separate. And if some animals get rights in our, in your world, none of them get rights. We think we're closer to that. The second part of my extension is talking about Western liberal democracies. Because I think opening government kind of suggests better us regulate it than the other country. I want to talk about two things. The first is the monopoly this creates. As I asked in a POI, it is obviously true that in both worlds big pharma exists, and the capacity for China to regulate big pharma is way worse than Western liberal democracies. However, the cliche in this isn't to suggest that we have better regulation, it's to suggest that it's a monopoly that's created by Chinese governments or like the Japanese government. What are the harms of this? Two things. We think first, obviously, we think that in a world in which there is a monopoly that existed with this specific country, Western liberal democracies are playing backwards. Obviously, we can't catch up to them, but having our own independent reason means we're able to do things like tie to legal person, tie to things like non-abusiveness. China isn't going to push for animal rights. It's not going to use this research and say, yeah, because we have greater cognition, we should all move towards animal rights. They're going to use this as a method for abusing animals. So we say, if they're going to be abusive towards animals with cognition, we would rather Western liberal democracies co-opt this and use it for the things I suggested to be true. I.e., fighting against slaughterhouses, fighting for things like veganism, because these animals are closer to cognition than they are now. For all those reasons, we are closer to a world in which animals have rights, in a world in which they are closer to you and I. For those reasons, I beg you to propose.
Closing government is right. Animals would make awesome employees, awesome soldiers, especially when you don't give them critical thinking skills. We don't know what this technology can do, and the incentives of corporations is not to make these animals benevolent, it is to exploit them and abuse them and replace humans. What are we going to bring you in extension? Firstly, a response to the animal rights extension from closing government, and then 3 new points. First, how corporations will use this. And newsflash, it isn't about organ donations, as Ola rightly suggests. It will tell you what it is about. Secondly, framing on this debate not being about whether this technology is good or bad, it is about Western liberal democracies exponentially increasing the use of this technology. And thirdly, new principled responses to OG about why it is immoral to give these animals a sentience. Firstly, on CG's animal rights extension. First, as Simone notes in a point of information and Amrit responds by calling us stupid, we say that this justifies the abuse of non-sentient animals. Because society will say we should value animals where they have sentience, which then justifies the abuse of animals which do not have that sentience. Because they say things like, well, these animals are like us, showing, and the rhetoric that will be used to describe why these animals should be given rights is, they are like us, which necessarily excludes the animals that are not like us and do not have sentience, which is still the vast amount. So you need to prove the animals with sentience, their rights, trickle down to the rest of them. Secondly, when the United States, etc., are supporting this policy, corporations invest a lot more in the fight in telling people that animal rights don't matter, because people will see that maybe animals are being abused, and corporations and politicians need to justify their actions and are far more likely to get involved in the fight about animal rights and are far more likely to win that fight with the money and power that corporations have, which means you are likely to get bad rhetoric and backwards movement on animal rights fights, because on our side we're principally consistent, because Western liberal democracies say it is bad for animals. Your side says this technology is fine for animals, which means that you justify abuses of animals and it's far harder to empower animal rights movements. But thirdly, it gives more people in power have to defend the abuses. Like politicians have to defend this policy when they're speaking in public debates. And on our side, it's easy to be principally consistent and say in animal rights fights that this is immoral. But fourthly, what rights will these animals get? Like everyone will still eat meat because it's cheaper everywhere. Slaughterhouses still exist because they're cheaper to run. And people are already investing in meat alternatives. They never point to the exact rights animals are likely to get under this policy. Like they're not going to vote. Like it is about like eating. Like people will still eat animals. So that extension is toothless, but also and contradictory, but also not proven mechanistically. First, how will corporations use this? Opening government says it would be nice if we used these animals in this way. We're going to prove, firstly, why private corporations get this technology and regulation is impossible, and secondly, why they will use them badly. Firstly, why do private corporations get this technology? And note here, even if they want to say it's symmetric because China already has it, we say exponentially more countries will get this technology by virtue of this government bench, because they support far more countries using this. Why will private corporations get it? Firstly, if it is true that the global community it is likely to have open access to and unlikely to have patent protection, and corporations can just buy them from the countries where this is legal. Secondly, there's large ramifications, and if it is true that it's so beneficial as OG suggests, governments will want to expedite this through the private market and make sure most people have access to it. But thirdly, it's created in the labs of private corporations, and it's very difficult to tell which animals have the sentience. They can't talk, but they do have feelings and emotions we can't see. So it's very difficult to understand which of the animals that are being abused, and we can't tell that, which means that regulation is almost impossible. And fourthly, when they reproduce with other animals, we have no idea how that sentience trickles down through generations, nor can we track it, which means it is impossible to regulate. So then secondly, why will corporations use this badly, and what will they do? Firstly, it is for research that has never happened before. It won't be for organs that market is saturated and cheaper from humans, and as OO suggests, there'll be opt-out organ donation with the same amount of critical capital. But we think they're likely to do two things. Firstly, the creation of employees, as CG weirdly concedes. If they want to replace basic jobs, say goodbye to low-income people who have not been skilled in other ways from being able to access jobs that they deserve. And we think that even if Amrit says it sucks, if it sucks to be in a low-income job, these animals are sentient too, so it equally sucks. Like, it is unclear why that is benefiting this today. But secondly, it's easy to give lots and lots of employees, like we can just graft opposable thumbs onto dogs, or, you know, we can remove the bits of the brain that gives them critical thinking skills, which make your employees perfectly obedient, perfectly good employees that will replace the humans at the bottom end of the rung with no incentive to protect them. But secondly, you also have no incentives to pay them, because the rhetoric around animals will still be they are somewhat dumber than us, somewhat less deserving of rights. They don't pay tax, they can't vote, so it's unlikely you'll ever give them benefits, which means you create a whole host of employees, likely as a result of this policy, if the technology works, which means that you will replace a huge amount of people, which is bad. Secondly, it also has potential uses in the military. Like, could you imagine totally obedient, violent, and dangerous animals who can now, like, listen to everything you say and do things they were previously unable to be capable of? And countries do have these incentives. Like, it's very difficult to conscript people into the military, and we can't predict what these animals will do. But thirdly, it's incredibly unpredictable and violent, because we think that many of these animals, like, they're really, like, dangerous, obviously, and we think it's very hard to know what they're going to do when they reproduce, and you can't track where they're going. And now there's, like, super, like, dangerous and super smart, like, rhinos or whatever, or, like, tigers, or whatever animal, or dogs even, that could attack and harm people. And this creates a world with unpredictable, dangerous animals roaming around, which is very difficult to do. And even if there are incentives to regulate it so, like, we don't get harmed by it, we say it's impossible once you start doing this, and more countries investing in this technology makes all these outcomes far more likely, and also, as I say, deprives people of jobs in the future, which this closing government team concedes. Given that you cannot regulate it in a perfect way, it's more important than always argues just like it's bad for animals. It's bad for us as well, and we think this is incredibly dangerous.
Other options have been exhausted in the medical sphere. If they hadn't been, this experimental and supposedly research would not be funded. It's strange that you could get a soldier rhino, but not a useful liver, but even if you could get both, shouldn't there be a global democratic discussion, even if it happens quicker?
Firstly, on the global democratic discussion, we think the discourse is worse when Western liberal democracies are doing it, because they're seen as hypocritical if they pull out China for doing certain things with their technology, but they are also using this technology to abuse animals in slightly different ways. Secondly, you're less likely to get universal restrictions like the WHO, when you are able to say, well, our use of this technology is fine, rather than taking a strong principled stance against the use of this technology at all. So we think the discourse is far better on our side when there isn't allegations of being hypocritical, but rather countries take a strong principled stance. That's an important piece of framing in this debate as well. But secondly, we think the scale of the harm is just much larger, as in Western liberal democracies exponentially increases the use of this technology, exponentially increases the unpredictable consequences and outcomes, and exponentially increases the difficulty in enforcement. And given they can't communicate, it is so hard to regulate, and our harms are very large. Quickly on the principal response to OG. OO says it's moral, and OG says it's a social good. Even if it is socially useful, we would not harvest the organs of alive people to give to more needy people in this debate, even if it led to socially utile outcomes, because people have bodily autonomy rights, and that is the new piece of principal material which proves why OO is also right in this debate. So even if it is socially good, this is incredibly immoral to do. Think of what corporations will do to this. They will not do it for the advancement of humanity. For good reasons, they will use it to make profit, and for those reasons, you should close.
upbench this entire debate has been the lack of comparativeness that has been afforded to both our extension and also the case from government as a whole. Because the issue with this is that this is a process that is going ahead. There are countries like China, Japan, Russia, who are huge powers, who are going to be engaging in this. They're going to be using it in the most pernicious forms, which are the forms that they characterize as occurring in very harmful ways towards animals. We tell you that there are two key premises that they've missed in this debate. The first thing is that people do not care about animals to the extent that we would like them to the extent that people, maybe in debating circles who are more progressive, do. And that is something that we need to change worldwide. That is something that we need to change in the minds of a large proportion of the population, and they have to give you no reasons for how that occurs, and we're quite flippant with Amrit's extension. But secondly, we tell you that when this is going ahead, the way in which the West is best able to co-opt and deal with the harms that are likely to come out of this is not by saying, we reject that in totality, we shun you for your behaviour, you are immoral monsters, because that's not when you get discussion or the ability to engage with things like that. What they are best able to do is engage with this and work through it in mechanisms which are likely to lead to the sorts of benefits that we tell you about, which I'm going to deal with in this speech. So firstly, I want to deal with OO and their extension in this debate, and then secondly, I want to deal with the nature of animal treatment and who is most likely to see an improvement on that on either side. And then also, I want to deal with how this is likely to be used and looking at whether or not it's likely to increase animal rights, as we told you in our extension. Okay, so what does CO tell us as their extension? They tell us that corporations are really exploitative and they're going to want to use this to abuse animals. Alright, we tell you firstly, corporations are already exploitative, and that is why we have trouble dealing with things like slaughterhouses. That is why we have trouble dealing with things like the way animals are killed, tortures, the way we have live exports. That is a huge issue in the world. They do not change this. They do not alter that treatment. What is the only material we ever get? OO tells us, oh, but it's going to be worse now when they have cognizance, so all those experiences are going to be worse. They're not going to put cognizance into animals going to slaughterhouses, right? That was obviously not the way that cognizance was going to be used. That cognizance was going specifically into animals who are likely to be engaging in things that, as we tell you, which is manual labour, which I'll deal with the benefits later on. So that can't fail the debate, and it was very much taking us at our worst, but unrealistic. We tell you that when corporations have a monopoly over how we view animals, when Peter cannot tell you that you should care about animals, the only way to get people to engage with that is to pull at the direct heartstrings that make us care about other human beings, that we've pulled at to make us care about other people from other groups who we once have thought shouldn't be afforded the same sorts of rights as us. Because when you're able to tap into that human ability to actually care and feel for other things, that is when you get change. That is when you get people willing to protest and people willing to care about changing the laws and policies. We told you in Amrit how we got that, because we got that through 4 ways. Firstly, we think that there's an arbitrary line that people draw which says that, oh, they do not have cognizance to the extent that we should care about them, because maybe they respond to stimuli, but they don't have the ability to really feel, they don't really know what's going on. We can put that in live expo, they don't actually know what's occurring to them. And we think that arbitrary line, we can see people already, when they see that animals have the capacity to cross that, are likely to care more. And that's evident from the fact that we treat certain animals differently from other animals. Like your pet, who you think knows when you're crying and knows when you're upset, you would never consider eating or can never consider killing the way that you consider another animal, right? That should be extended and afforded to other animals, and the way we extend that and afford that ability to other animals is by ensuring they have the cognitive ability for us to want to care about them and to want to afford them these sorts of things. So what does that tug at? The second thing is that we have empathy here, which means it is significantly harder to kill something when it is capable of showing very viscerally the sorts of pain that it is in, and being able to cognitively realize that it is about to go to a slaughterhouse, and being able to realize what is likely to happen to it and how it is going to be harmed. Maybe that is not communication through language in the way, but it is communication through a significantly more emotive, visceral, and powerful expense. We think that is incredibly important. The third thing we tell you in Amrit that gets no response from CO is the ability to fight legally. That is the fact that our law does not adapt to care about things that are subhuman in a way that means that they do not have cognitive ability, that means that they are something that is something we don't care about. You significantly increase the capacity to do this, and you significantly strengthen these sorts of animal rights groups when you give them the ability to say, this is the thing that has cognitive ability. We can do tests, we can show you how it is able to respond to this in a new way. We can show you that these are a group we should care about. They could never achieve that on that side of the house, because we have tried for so long to get people to care about animals in their current state. They do not care about them in their current state. No, thank you. What does CO tell us? They tell us, but you're going to reduce the care for other animals who don't have cognizant ability. Firstly, no one cares about those on either side of the house, right? That is not a benefit in this debate. Secondly, we think that you're significantly more likely to care about another animal that looks identical to an animal once you first cross that barrier, being like, oh, this animal is somebody that I should engage with, I should have feelings for. You cross that barrier when you give them cognizance. You now see that animal that looks identical to another one that doesn't have cognizance, and you're much more likely to have your heartstrings tugged when you're trying to eat it. Have your heartstrings tugged when you see an identical animal experiencing a slaughterhouse environment. That is when you get that ability to care about animals which are not cognizant. That was only ever going to occur outside the house. Cool, bash outside, but stand for what is actually your role in this debate. Sure.
Human slavery still exists, which proves being human is not enough to stop exploitation. Is it worth risking the torturous experiments for animal rights outcomes we work in together?
I'd say we've improved a lot from non-human slavery in the last 50 years, right? Would that improvement have occurred if we didn't start to consider the fact that other groups or like emotions that are experienced should be validated and should be experienced, right? That cognizance that occurs is what gives the ability to care about those sorts of things. If we did not engage with it, that is a risk. Also, we note that the sorts of harms they push into us, which are so huge that do not justify this, do not occur to a large portion of these animals, right? Because when the West engages with a couple of these animals in these sorts of tests, which are expensive, they're already doing it on a wide scale yet, if they see they fail and are unsuccessful, they are unlikely to continue that. They're unlikely to give slaughterhouse animals this cognizance, right? So that means that the trade-off harm here is some animals may experience harm if it's unsuccessful, but if we are successful, that is a huge benefit that means that it's likely to be extended to a large number of animal groups and a large number of activist movements. We tell you also that the ability for these animals to have more cognizance also means in instances that they can fight for themselves or be able to protect themselves better in the ways that they engage with factory farming, in the way that they are treated in those sorts of environments. Also, we tell you that animals have the ability to be able to improve their standard of living when they have that cognizance. Why was it not enough for them to tell us that they were going to be used as war animals at OO? We tell you firstly, if someone was going to use animals and turn them into war machines, that was probably going to be China and Russia. They're probably doing that on their side of the house. We told you at Amrit that the way we dealt with that sort of behaviour, the way we dealt with that was engaging with it by showing that these animals were going to become more cognizant, by showing that cognizance could occur in a beautiful way that brought a new form of attachment, that brought a new form of ability to extend beyond your limits to this world in animals. And that was when people were likely to say, no, they shouldn't be used in war. No, they shouldn't be engaged with in those sorts of ways. Their side of the house, China and Russia, probably still engaged with that. That was probably a really bad thing. The West just shunned them and called them monsters, so we're probably locked out of that discussion. We tell you that people were less likely to eat animals when they had cognizance and they could see that they should care about them. Even if that slaughterhouse animal was not the animal that had cognizance, it was an animal you cared more about when you cared about the other ones that looked identical to it, when you cared about the other ones that had the capacity to have emotions, right? Because you were able to ascend that to the fact that you care about young children even though they're not as fully cognizant as older human beings, because of the fact that they're similar, because of the fact that you know that they have that capacity, and that is something that means you're more likely to have that empathy in you. Because we were the only team that presented you any way, shape, or form of dealing with the horrible status quo, which is animal treatment, of dealing with the fact that animal treatment is justified through difficult means, we were so proud to be CG.
Panel, when CRISPR was announced at a medical conference in China, it was subject to immense critique from the international community, which forced China to impose regulation on gene mutation. And that's the thing, when the potential of this technology is to replace all humans with few transferable skills to create a non-responsive rhino army, it is imperative that the Western liberal democracies can protect them without the fear of being undermined or sounding hypocritical. And we say that these Western liberal democracies do not accelerate the process of that technology. It was not enough for Elle to spend 7 minutes not responding to our extension. We tell you this is the most important thing in the debate because it has the implications. It was directly against the interests of these democracies. We tell you this is the biggest harm that we bring you in extension. I'm going to do 3 things in this speech. Firstly, explain why we get up over CG, explain why extension won the debate, and thirdly, explain why we get up over OG. Firstly, why we get up over CG. Their main claim here is, it is harder to hurt animals now that you see them, be upset and they can actually express where they hurt. First thing to say, animals can already cry, like crocodile tears exist. Secondly, it also means that even if you are successful in doing this, now you change the discourse around animal rights too. You only care about animals as the ones that have sentience, and that is the mechanism that they rely upon. That is, individuals only care more about animals now that they have sentience. And we say that that is particularly harmful because now it reduces the capital people have lobbying against animal rights as a whole, and that is the stands a harm in this debate. Secondly then, what is our abstention win us debate? What do we tell you? We tell you that firstly, the types of people who are likely to get access to this technology aren't just governments as everyone's tried to say, it is also private corporations. For the reason that if we do see this team's analysis about this technology being beneficial, obviously governments are going to want to expedite the process as to which they actually are able to get produced. They want to make it more efficient. And for the reason that the free market, free economy, etc. is the most efficient actor in this debate, as a consequence, it is likely you license it out, it is likely it takes place in private corporations, which means that it is impossible to regulate that in the sense that private corporations do get their hands on this product. What do we tell you then? Why is this impossible to regulate? We give you reasons that rule about reasons like how it is impossible, for example, to be able to tell different types of animals, how it is much harder to be able to understand it, which means that this technology now has the potential to be used in bad ways. What are the ways we tell you? One, it looks like, for example, creating a rhino army. It looks like, for example, creating jobs like, monkeys to do things, which take up the jobs and labour occupation skills of those who have the least transferable skills in society. They are the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate, in that the government has already let them down, and we said that that is something that we ought to take a look at, which means that when the potential of this technology is to strip other individuals in society of their ability to be able to be self-autonomous, when it strips individuals of society to be able to, do things, we said that it is incredibly harmful in this debate because it means that now it not only impacts animals, but it also impacts the rest of society. So it means our contribution to this debate is the most significant in that we tell you it harms the most people. Secondly, though, importantly, we tell you given that the outcomes of this technology are unclear in the sense that maybe these animals are able to reproduce, we don't know how they're going to react, but and so on. We tell you that because it is so turbulent, Western liberal democracies should not gamble on the idea that they could be so harmful, and we say that it is their duty to stop it. Therefore, that means, firstly, our abstention impacts the most people. Secondly, we prove that it is impossible to regulate, and importantly, this is the mechanism Owen relies on their case. But thirdly, we directly explain why this is against the interests of Western liberal democracies, which, as the topic says, is who we should care most about in this debate.
The idea of the closing path, that we should stop research now because of potential rhino soldiers or worker dogs in hundreds of years, is not what the government should consider. The government should consider its obligations to humans who now have the potential to have benefits in the near future according to the scientific community.
Yeah, so I'm going to explain now why we're going to go OO, and I think, OG, and I think the thing is in this debate, they've never explained to us why this is the best way to do that, and at that point, why that we should forego the trade-off of harm in 100 years. And that is for the reason is, their first claim is, you're able to do things like harvest organs, etc. One, we're having to put this money into things such as finding more people to do organ donations, or finding better ways to incentivize people to actually do this. It was unclear why this was something that we ought to prioritize. Their second claim here is, there's now a moral shift in that we ought to give individuals, or ought to give these animals the opportunity at sentience if we actually can. But firstly, it was unclear why they would actually be able to, it was unclear why that was something that was actually desirable if they were unable to actually express themselves in the first place. But secondly, we only owe individuals this opportunity if it is guaranteed that they are able to live a good life. For example, lots of women get abortions because they think they cannot raise their children properly, in a good environment. And as a consequence, because we don't know what the impact of this technology is and how these animals will actually react, we tell you that it is unclear why we actually owe these individuals this opportunity. At the end of this debate, it's clear that side CO has given you the most noble contribution to this debate. We tell you it doesn't just impact animals, but it impacts the rest of society, and as a consequence, you should definitely give us the win.